Discrimination is a term that's become synonymous with South Africa's painful past. And while the policies were designed by the architects of apartheid, it required law enforcement officers to ensure they were abided by. Well, those days are gone, but it appears that the inherited behavior of discrimination along racial and class lines may not have been forgotten by our current men and women in blue. So why, 27 years after apartheid, do we still find police reacting differently when they respond to protests in affluent areas? Yet they seem to put their knees on the necks of our most vulnerable people. Well, to answer this now, we're joined by policing expert Eldred de Klerk. Eldred, thank you for standing by for us. We used to have the public order police that were trained in crowd control and were very much dealing with the so-called black masses who were going to overthrow the National Party. Does that kind of culture still exist in our policing system?
Hi, Annika. It's very difficult to say no because we have too much supporting evidence that supports the assertion that the police fail to distinguish who they're policing, they fail to differentiate, and then they have no distinction. So what they do, policing remains then a question of policing the underclass. And public perception is that that is true. So it's very difficult to argue in the face of overwhelming evidence, as you already cited, that police are not in a position to say, let's facilitate this public protest. Let's not contest what it is about. Let's understand that protest by its very nature is disruptive and it can even get violent. And our job remains to uphold and respect the law and to try to help people give effect to their rights to peaceful, unarmed protest. So unfortunately, the culture of we have to maintain law and order at all costs persists even in a democracy.
We haven't just seen it here, it's also been in the United States. We had the Black Lives Matter protests being dealt very differently to the insurrection on Capitol Hill, with a majority of white protesters climbing into the state legislature and, the Capitol and doing nothing. Is this a lack of training, or is it simply a case of white people in middle-class areas aren't going to be violent?
No, white people in middle-class areas can be violent. The violence itself is not the issue. It's the legacy of policing. Policing started with watchmen, and the whole idea behind the watchmen was to protect the property and the lives of those who were privileged and the owners of those properties. And unfortunately, the owners of the properties and goods and their lives were set above those of anybody else. And we continue with those colonial and, unfortunately, in South Africa, apartheid-based policing that seems we can't seem to get out of that particular mold. So we have to re-envisage policing. And I'm not necessarily saying that we need to defund the police or that we need to completely abolish the police. We need a very serious conversation in South Africa about the kind of policing that we deserve, that is based in our constitution. Our constitution says that the police are vested with authority, and part of that authority is at times to restrict our civil liberties and our human rights. Yet when they do so, they have to uphold our dignity and they have to ensure that they protect life. They also have a duty to care and a duty to protect, and that life is valued above property. Somehow we haven't seen the leadership within the South African police, and we haven't seen the public will within the South African police to somehow give effect to that in the day-to-day reality of managing protest.
Why not? Is it a matter of a lack of training? I mean, in some cases, you'll see the police are clearly panicked and they are not trained correctly in crowd control.
Well, it is both training and it's also a question of consequence. We've seen that institutions like the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, the Civilian Secretariat, and even Parliament, and their ability to oversee and provide civilian direction to the police seem to have diminished, or it's just completely not there. It's absent. The second thing is indeed training. Training needs to be reality-based. It needs to be scenario-based, and the Marikana Commission has clearly articulated that in their very extensive reporting and investigation and listening to witnesses. And then thirdly, there needs to be consequences for police, both individual officers and the police as an institution, when they fail to respect their own prescripts and when they don't uphold and respect the law.
All right, thank you so much there for that discussion. Policing expert Eldred de Klerk on why police behave differently in certain areas and in certain types of protest situations.